Alright guys, good morning. Today we're going to be taking a look at my DIY rooftop tent pulley system. I've been working on this thing for a few weeks now and I'm excited to share it with you guys. The entire system is built from cheap materials purchased from Lowe's, Harbor Freight, and off of Amazon, and the whole thing comes in for only around 150 bucks, and all materials used are going to be linked down in the description to make this real easy for you guys. This system is built hanging from the ceiling of my carport, which is also partially enclosed and has a slanted roof. So this presented a lot of unique problems. I know that most of you guys are probably just here to see a detailed walkthrough of the system and see all the components and how I have it constructed and see it work. So that's what we're going to do first, and then we'll get into all those extra details at the end of the video. So I think the best way to go about this is going to be to start by dropping this tent down to the floor, and that way we can really see how all the components are linked together and how they work. So in order to start the process of lowering this thing down to the ground, we need to remove the safety straps. We've got 5 total safety straps on this rooftop tent pulley system. We've got the 2 outer ones, which are those 2 green ones right there that run lengthwise down the tent, and those secure it to those ceiling beams, and we also have one that runs horizontally that also secures it to those ceiling beams. Those 3 straps together cradle the tent. That way it can't move in any particular direction if there's wind or something that blows under here, and that secures it firmly to the ceiling. That way there's no sway, and it also takes the weight off of the pulley system when the tent is in storage. That way it's not just hanging by the ropes and putting stress on those ropes. We also have these 2 orange straps, and those straps secure the tent to the 2x4 base of the pulley system. That way when this thing is lowering or raising, those 2x4s can't slip out. I like to remove my horizontal one, the camouflage colored one, first, and I've got a little knot tied on the end of that tag end, and that way when I undo that strap, I can just drop that strap down, and instead of having the ratchet end fall off the end of the line there, it'll stay secured on there. The second thing we're going to do is we're going to remove our 2 outer straps, these 2 green colored ones. We'll pop this open, and you'll see when we do that, that tent settles down on this side onto the ropes there of the pulley system. And these actually have a spring clip on the ends of the hooks here, and that spring clip makes sure that this can't slide off. The eye that I actually have securing the rope to the 2x4 base, I left the end of it long on the bottom. It hangs out about 1.5 inches, and that way when these straps are tight against this thing, I put them inside that, and that way if it gets real windy and this thing does have a little bit of movement, there's no possible way with these things tight that these straps can slide off the end of the 2x4. And then we've got one more strap on this side as well. And now the tent's fully lowered down onto that pulley system, and we're good to go ahead and lower it. And we're gonna get into all this in detail in just a minute, but all you need to know right now is I've got the ropes routed through that gap in the ceiling up there above the beams, and it comes all the way down to this back wall, where we have it attached to a winch cable that comes down to a winch right here. And I've got this set up to where we can just take a drill with a socket on it and put that drill on there, and that's what we're gonna use to raise and lower this. And away we go. We're gonna do just a basic walkthrough of the whole thing. You got a 2x4 base that the tent rests on. There are 2 of those 2x4s. We've got those ropes connected to the 2x4s with a metal eye. There are 4 individual ropes. Every single rope on all 4 corners of this tent is its own entity. It goes up through its own individual pulley. After the front pulley, those 2 ropes join together and they run parallel through a pulley right there. And then there's another pulley up on top of that beam, and both sides are mirrors of each other. So there's also a pulley there and another pulley right there. These 2 ropes on each side, so 4 ropes total, run inside the shed through that gap that's right there between where these 2 beams are. Okay, and then coming inside the shed, they come over that beam through that gap that we just talked about, and all 4 of them connect to a large D-ring. That D-ring then converts all 4 of those ropes down to one single cable, which goes to the winch on the back wall of the shed via a hook that comes with the winch. It's got that winch cable that runs all the way down to a single pulley that I have on the back wall, and then it comes through that pulley, runs down through a hole that I have drilled in the shelf right here, all the way down to the winch, which I have mounted on the back wall to the studs via a 2x6. So now that you guys have had a walkthrough of the entire system and you have a basic understanding of how the whole thing works together in unison, let's talk about the individual components of the system. Starting with the 2x4s that form a base for the tent to rest on, they stick about 10 inches out on all four corners, and the length of these 2x4s corresponds with the distance between the two outer beams where we have the pulley system connected up top. Then on all four corners we have a large lag bolt that has an eye on top of it. And if you take a look at that lag bolt, you'll notice that I have it secured to the 2x4 via a washer and a nut on both sides that sandwiches that 2x4 in there, and that way this can't move around, and it also isn't possible for it to pull through the 2x4 under the weight of the tent. To connect these ropes to the eyes, I decided to just go directly to them with a uni knot. I thought about doing a D-ring or something on here so I could just quick release it if I wanted to, but the reason I decided against that is because in my particular application, I've got these barn doors that need to be able to swing open underneath the tent when it's in its stowed position against the ceiling, and having any extra distance like that would cause a tent to hang down too far and not be able to open these doors up. Then the rope comes up and it goes through its own individual pulley, and these pulleys are actually part of a Kayak Hoist system that you can purchase off of Amazon. Each one of these is $20. You have to purchase 2 of these in order to get all 4 of the pulleys you need. Each kit comes with 1 back and 1 front. The back does differ from the front. You'll notice the back has 1 single pulley on it, and the front one actually has 2 pulley wheels. That's because the back rope has to pass through the front one to continue forward to that next pulley, and the front one also has its own rope that has to go over a pulley wheel. And you'll also notice the front one does have a brake. That's what's hanging down off the front, and in this particular application, we're not using that brake. These Kayak Hoist systems are rated for 125 pounds a piece, so both of these together are well within the weight limits of lifting the 115-pound Yakima Skyrise. Now again, each of the 4 corners has its own individual rope and its own individual pulley. So the way that this is rigged up is the rope from the back corner comes up, it passes through its pulley, runs down the beam, and then it just passes through the front pulley to continue to the next one up there. And then we have the one that connects to the front corner of the tent that comes up, and that passes through that second pulley wheel on the front pulley bracket, and that also goes to that front one. And you'll notice once these 2 pass through this front pulley, they parallel each other, and both of them go through that pulley right there, and that's what routes them to the pulley that's mounted up on top of the beam right there. That pulley and that pulley, the 2 on the opposite side and the one that's on the back wall in there, which we'll show you in just a second, are all 5 the exact same pulley purchased from Lowe's. Taking a look at those pulleys, you can see that the wheel is actually very large, and these are great because you also have the option to mount these flat against the beam like I have this one here, or you can mount them vertically against the beam like the one that I have on the back wall inside the shed. Because my roof is slanted downwards, I actually had to put a spacer in the front of this to make the rope in line with this pulley right here, so it wasn't rubbing on the edge of this and potentially causing fraying on the rope. So I just used a washer and a nut underneath one of these corners, and that tilted it down enough to make this level going through the pulley. And I also did the same thing on the one mounted on the beam in here, and this one routes the rope down the length of the shed. So I needed this to route it in a fashion where the rope would be going downwards to follow the roof to the back wall. So this one, I have a spacer on the outer side, and that tilts it forward enough to route that rope so it can slope downwards towards the back wall. All right, so that is the entirety of the outside portion of the pulley system that's outside the shed, and really this is the most complex part of the entire system. Once we go inside and this all funnels down into that one individual cable, it gets very, very simple. But I just wanted to give you guys this view of the outside portion in its entirety without the tent in the way. That way you guys can kind of paint that mental picture of how the entire thing works here. And then once we get inside the shed, you'll see those 2 pulleys that we just talked about up on top of the beam there. Those route all 4 of those cables, 2 on each side, down to 1 single D-ring. And this is the connection where all 4 of those cables go to 1 single cable, which goes to the winch on the back wall there. I've got all 4 of those ropes tied to this D-ring using a uni knot once again. Then we get to the winch system. So the cable and the hook come pre-crimped with the winch, but we've got the hook that connects to that D-ring, and that's what routes this down to this single cable, which runs all the way to that pulley on the back wall right there. I've got this shelf that I had to route the cable through, so I've just got a hole drilled through the shelf right there. So in order to line that up to get it far enough out from the shelf frame here, I just put 2 2x4s on the beam that lifted this out 3 inches, and that way this cable routes down through that hole and I didn't have to cut all the way through the support structure for my shelf. Getting into the winch, this thing is perfect for this application that we're using it for. This is a trailer winch from Harbor Freight. It's like 30 bucks, and this thing has a 2,000 pound lifting capacity. It comes with 25 feet of that cable. This is the worm gear style winch that they sell. They've got a couple different ones, but I went with this one specifically because this worm gear style is going to allow you to let out a lot less line and much more finely control how much line you're letting out, which means that you can lower the tent a lot slower than you could with another design. You can see like how fast the worm gear is spinning and how slowly the main spool is spinning underneath it. So this winch comes with a handle, but because this is a very slow spinning worm gear, using this handle is going to take a million years to lower the tent. So that's why I opted to go with the power drill setup. I just have like a socket adapter on my power drill. So it's a 19 millimeter. So 19 millimeter socket, deep well will fit over that nut. You can raise it, you can lower it, you can control the speed of it still using the drill, but you're not having to hand crank for a million years. So it takes literally 0 effort to lift this tent 10 feet all the way up to the ceiling out there. And then finally, I've got that winch mounted to a 2x6, which I have mounted directly into the studs on the back wall of my shed here. And I've got that winch mounted to the 2x6 with some large 1/2 inch lag bolts, which go all the way through, and I have some pretty huge washers on the back side of those. That way, no matter how much stress is being put on this thing, these bolts cannot pull through that 2x6. So the first decision that I had during this design process was, do I want the tent to hang outside the shed or inside the shed? I definitely could have done it inside the shed. I've got these 2 big barn doors that I could back the truck through, drop the tent on, and then pull back out. My problem is I tend to use this shed as a catch-all. So I always have a ton of stuff sitting in here. So the problem that I foresee myself running into is every single time that I want to drop the tent onto the truck, I would have to clean up my shed just to back the truck in there. If I put it out here, I could just back the truck right up and drop it on whenever I want. So then the next problem was, do I want the rope to be controlled from out here somewhere, or do I want it to be controlled from inside the shed? And I decided that I wanted it to be controlled from inside the shed. One, because it kind of has to be. You kind of have to have enough distance of rope in order to pull the height that you need to pull. So in this case, I have 10 feet of height that I'm trying to lift, so I need at least 10 feet of distance in order to lift that height. So that was the main contributing factor, but the other contributing factor was that I don't want it to be able to be controlled from out here, because that makes it more prone to theft. Which brings us back to the issue of having to route the ropes over the top of that beam. So that presented some problems, because what we ultimately ended up with is the center beam splitting the 2 sets of cables from either side, and I needed them to come together somehow. So because the roof is actually sloped downwards, I was actually able to tilt those pulley wheels on the top of that beam like we talked about a minute ago, which angled those ropes downward enough to where that D-ring was able to sit on the underside of that joist on the inside of the shed, and all 4 of those could just barely pass that joist and connect to that D-ring, and it ended up working out perfect. But it took a lot of different tries and a bunch of planning to figure that out. And then finally we come to our final major issue that I ran into during this design process, and this was a little bit tricky. So originally I designed this to have a 2-to-1 mechanical advantage, meaning that if you're lifting 100 pounds, it feels like you're only lifting 50 pounds. So it makes it a lot easier to lift heavy stuff. And the way that I was originally doing that were using these. And these actually come with the Kayak pulley system that I ordered off of Amazon. So each individual one of these systems comes with 2 of these, and these are meant to be mounted to the bottom down here. And you can see that's what these extra holes in the 2x4 are, because originally I had these mounted up. And what these do is, instead of having just this single rope like this that connects at the bottom and then comes up and goes through the pulley, that rope actually connects to a hole up there. It comes down and it would go through that pulley wheel on the bottom, and then it would come back up and then go through that pulley right there and continue on forward to wherever you have it routed to. And what that does is, having a pulley on top and on the bottom, is when you pull on that cable, instead of just having this one length, it actually lifts 2 lengths of cable, and it causes it to feel like you're only lifting half the weight that you actually are. Initially, that's why I bought this specific Kayak lift system kit, because I wanted that 2-to-1 mechanical advantage so I could lift this thing by hand and not have to buy the more expensive winch that I ultimately ended up buying. The reason that did not work out, though, is because I failed to think about the fact that in order to have that 2-to-1 mechanical advantage, you also have to have a 2-to-1 pulling distance versus lifting height. in your cable, meaning that if I'm lifting something 10 feet, I have to have a 20-foot distance that I can pull that cable, because instead of just lifting one 10-foot cable, you're now lifting two 10-foot cables per corner, so you're lifting a total of 20 feet of cable, and you have to be able to pull that 20 feet of distance to be able to lift it. So just remember that if you guys order this kayak pulley system and you want that 2-to-1 mechanical advantage, you'll get the pulleys to be able to do it. You just have to have twice the distance versus the height that you're trying to lift it. So ultimately, in my particular case, because I only have 12 feet of distance inside that shed from front wall to back wall versus 10 feet of height, I could only lift this about halfway from the ground before the hook on the pulley system would be all the way at the far pulley, and it wouldn't be able to lift anymore. So that's why I ended up just going to single cables, eliminating that mechanical advantage, and then going with the $30 Harbor Freight winch that would allow me to lift this using a drill versus having to lift 115 pounds by hand pulling on a pulley and then tying it off to a cleat. So in a nutshell, that pretty much covers all of the major issues that I had to overcome while designing this thing. In reality, it took me about 3 weeks to get this thing all figured out and get it working properly. So hopefully by seeing the way that I designed my system and seeing how it all works, you guys can make your life a whole lot easier when you're designing your system, and you can avoid some of those struggles that I faced while designing mine. The last thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna lift this thing back up, and I'm gonna show you guys how to put it back into its stowed position up against the top of the carport. So first things first, we got to connect our two safety straps, which are going to secure the tent to the 2x4s, so those 2x4s can't slide out from underneath the tent while this thing is lifting up. So we've got those on, they're tightened down, so now we can come on inside the tent, we can grab our power drill, and we can start lifting. And one thing that I want to note while you're lifting this thing up is I like to use my left hand and guide this onto the spool. That way it's nice and even across here. And the other thing is you can see that there's this little nut on the inside that actually holds the retaining clip, which is what secures this cable to the spool. So that'll get caught up on there if it's too close over to the side, and it'll pull a little bit. So I like to just kind of use my left hand and guide that away while I use my right hand to control the power drill on this nut right here. All right, so now the tent is lifted into its highest position that we're able to lift it to using the pulley system. You can see that the winch is all the way at the end of the pulley. We've got all 4 cables extending all the way down. So now the final step to this is we need to put our safety straps on, and we're gonna crank those down, and that's not only gonna lift it the rest of the way up, but it's also going to hold it nice and snug against the ceiling so it can't move around in the wind. I like to do my 2 outer straps first, which in my case are gonna be these green ones right here. So we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna grab that and climb on up the ladder. So we'll clip that strap off up there. Essentially all we're gonna do is we're gonna make sure that that strap is on the inside of those 2 bolts. And then we're gonna pull our slack out, which is gonna pull that nice and tight. And then we can start ratcheting this down, which is gonna lift this up nice and snug to the ceiling. Now the final step is we need to take this strap that goes sideways across the tent, and we need to secure that up. So this is gonna go directly around the base of the tent, whereas those ones go around the base of the 2x4s. Snug this up, and then we can tighten that down. All right, guys, and that's going to conclude the DIY rooftop tent walkthrough video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, let me know down below in the comments. Now is also a great time to go over and follow the Maverick Overland Adventures Facebook page. Over there, you can send me direct messages. Otherwise, thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope it helped you out, and I look forward to seeing you guys on the next one.